It's fascinating as a media monitor to watch the impact that social media actually has on news and not the other way around. Zalda took to the Twitter platform a couple of days ago and started bleating about certain elements about Jacob Zuma. She ended up changing her Twitter handle to Zalda van Riebeeck, and this caused an absolute outcry on the Twitter platform. The next day only, news media started reporting about Zalda's activity. Zalda accounted for 2.18% of the big stories in January in news media. But when you have a look at social media, that number almost triples with the responses that came from local South Africans and a very big herald of disappointment. To the point that Zalda actually ended up apologizing across the various social media platforms the same day. We had some good news though here at home. We had Bafana go through to AFCON after 10 straight wins, and everybody was behind our boys. Last night, unfortunately, the defeat against Algeria made a little slump in the charts, but AFCON and Bafana certainly dominating both the news media and the social media here at home. AFCON coming in at 22% of the news reports across big stories in January. But when you take that statistic and have a look at social media, it over triples. 65.7% belongs to AFCON in social media. Bafana, big chunk of the news media in South Africa, 42% of the conversation reported by journalists, and then online only 20%, which means the people at home were referring really to the AFCON 2015 rather than Bafana in their tweets. But either way, it's been a massive story. And one of the big losses for a brand over the month has been Eskom. News media taking more of the conversation than anything else. News coming in at over a quarter of the big stories this month in South African news belong to Eskom, 27% to Eskom. Us on the social networks, I think we're bored of the story. We've ridden it as far as it can go, coming in just over 10% of our conversation online over a 30-day period. So that's what's happening in South Africa. Those are the big brands coming under fire and also being heralded. But overseas, internationally, there's something that as a media intelligence provider absolutely astonishes me. And that is the Charlie Hebdo story versus the Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria. So we saw news break less than 2 weeks ago about Charlie Hebdo and the Paris attacks. And that took the world by storm, not only in news media, but also in social media. I mean, we had various hashtags trending, and Jesu Charlie was one of the biggest hashtags in the history of Twitter. But what is startling to me is in news media, we found that the Paris attacks account for more press in a 30-day period than Ebola, coming in at 50.93% against Ebola's 36%, where the Nigeria attack comes in at 1.56% of the international reporting. That statistic taken from over 100 countries across the globe. Air Asia got double the press that the Nigeria attack did. And that to me is just startling. So we then put that specific statistic together to see just in news. So we're not talking about what you and I are saying at home on our social media platforms. Here we're talking about what the journalists are feeding us as the consumer, what we're being told to read about. Paris attacks over the past month comes in at 88% of the news reporting in 100 countries, and the Nigeria attacks come in at just over 10%, 11.64%. In Nigeria, in the first attack alone, 2,000 people died. In the Charlie Hebdo attack, 12 people died, and I struggle to understand the perspective of how there isn't more focus on what's happening in Nigeria. We've seen that statistic has really crept up over the past 2 or 3 days. But when the story first broke about Boko Haram, it accounted for less than 1% against Charlie Hebdo. The only reason it started to climb now is because Boko Haram is claiming more presence across the African continent, and we've seen stories come out of Cameroon now, etc. But I find that startling and very disappointed with the news media internationally in general. A lot of it can be attributed to the fact that the news media platforms coming out of Europe and out of the Americas are a lot bigger, and there's a lot more of them than there are here at home or in the African continent, but that doesn't mean the story is not newsworthy. If we're willing to give 36% of our news reporting to Ebola, why only 1.56% to the Nigeria attacks of Boko Haram? I find that startling.